Do you want to make money and invest into making a positive impact on the world, or simply avoid investing into certain industries that you morally disagree with? In this video, we'll discuss how to get started with sustainable investing. We'll discuss what sustainable investing is. We'll discuss what some specific tools are that you can use to get started immediately. We'll discuss some portfolio ideas that you can implement. And we'll go over how to avoid investing into funds that claim to be more sustainable than they actually are. Sustainable investing matters because it helps tackle global issues like the climate crisis and helps you align your money with your moral values by avoiding to invest into certain industries that you are in moral disagreement with, while also maybe investing into thematic areas that you believe could make a positive difference in the future when it comes to tackling critical global issues like the climate crisis, for example. There's funds that are dedicated to renewable energy, hydrogen, or other critical technologies that are needed to solve global challenges that we are facing today. Now, what even is sustainable investing? But just to go over it briefly, it means that we are investing in a way that also considers the future generations that are going to be on the planet. A common term that's often used is called ESG investing, which stands for environmental, social, and governance. And this basically refers to certain criteria that you consider when you invest your money by looking at environmental factors like how am I harming the environment, potentially harming or benefiting the environment through my actions, how am I harming or improving social conditions as a result of my business activity, and governance, looking at how is my business organized, like how am I treating my employees, do I have a significant number of female leaders in my company. Now, this is relevant when we talk about passive funds, for example, which we will focus on in this video. Passive funds, basically also known as exchange-traded funds or ETFs, are funds that include a range of different companies and therefore is not a single stock of a single company, but therefore has basically a basket of stocks, like almost like instead of having an apple, you now have a whole fruit basket of different fruits, right? More variety, more diversification, and therefore you are less at risk if one of these companies goes bankrupt for whatever reason. Now, there's different types of exchange-traded funds that are sustainable. There's, for example, exclusionary ETFs. These are ETFs that exclude certain types of businesses from their portfolio altogether. That could be, for example, fossil fuel extraction. That could be different types of weapons like nuclear weapons, conventional weapons, civilian firearms, and those kind. Then there's other ones that, for example, exclude tobacco, alcohol, gambling, all kinds of things that you could have a moral disagreement with. Then there is thematic ETFs. Thematic ETFs invest into a certain theme that look into, for example, renewable energies or hydrogen or semiconductors, certain industry themes, having different companies part of that portfolio that are active in this area. For example, we have hydrogen, we have different hydrogen companies in it, and having like 60 or so, we can therefore, diversify our portfolio that way and invest into this area if we believe it's going to be significant in the future. And we'll have some portfolio ideas that we'll show to you in just a moment as well. The largest holdings of these so-called ethical funds, however, it's good to understand, are not necessarily climate-aligned companies or companies that raise awareness about climate change and try to fight it in that way. These are often companies that have scored well in terms of their corporate climate change action, which basically means that how they reduce their emissions and try to reduce their impact on climate change or any other global challenges, let's say, or improving social conditions internally. That, means that these have done well in their own company operations. This often means that they have been leaders in, for example, reporting their emissions, as well as making targeted actions to reducing their emissions, reducing their waste, improving like female leadership and equality of pay, as well as other considerations when it comes to that. It is also important to note that sustainable investing has grown significantly over the years. In 2020, the Global Sustainability Investment Alliance has published a statistic saying that there's $35.3 trillion market for sustainable investing products in 2020. Now, this is an insane amount of money, which showcases that this is a significantly growing field. The last 2 years alone have grown by 15% each, and this is a growing trend. This accounts for a total of 36% of all investment products in the US, Canada, Japan, Europe, and Australasia, which is a massive amount of money. All right, so how do you decide which ETF or which investment option to buy when it comes to sustainable investing? So in this video, we'll only discuss passive funds. So we're going to have a look at how to decide what type of fund you wish to invest into. So first of all, I would recommend looking into your goals and your values as such. Are there certain things that I morally disagree with? Like, for example, do I not agree with fossil fuels? Do I not agree with conventional weapons being sold? Do I not agree with tobacco industry, with alcohol, with various industries? This can really be a good indicator in terms of what you want to perhaps exclude from your portfolio, and perhaps look at different types of exclusionary ETFs that exist. And there's another video where I described what the different types of ETFs are that exclude different types of industries. So that might be a really good video for you to see as well. However, it is not always easy to distinguish between a fossil fuel company or a company that contributes to fossil fuels. So it's very much required to look at what do you morally agree with, right? Because there's a lot of fossil fuel companies that are actually leaders in renewable energy investments. So you have to think, do I want to invest into fossil fuel companies that make a significant effort to produce more renewable technologies, or do I want to exclude fossil fuels altogether, even though they make that effort? So this is something that you have to make a decision for yourself. However, when it comes to portfolio performance, it's not always at the cost of fossil fuels that you make less financial returns. Now, there's often the argument in the sustainable investing community or outside that fossil fuel contribution to your portfolio will actually significantly reduce your financial returns. Now, this is not actually true, because there's a lot of papers out there that state actually that there's no statistically significant impact of fossil fuels on your financial returns in the long run. So I would definitely have a look and inform yourself. But there's research that suggests that there's no significant difference in terms of portfolio performance. Other papers, such as the one in 2018 that's also in the show notes, also states that significant investments into renewable energy technology will actually drive a higher portfolio return in the long run. A paper titled "The Financial Impact of Divestment from Fossil Fuels" found that there's no statistically significant difference between the risk-adjusted performance of fossil fuel stocks and non-fossil fuel stocks. There's also another study in the Global Financial Journal in 2018, which are, by the way, all linked in the show notes as well, that even found that using a range of measures, portfolios that divest from fossil fuels and utilities and invest in clean energy perform better than those with fossil fuels and utilities. So there is significant evidence that there's not necessarily a trade-off when it comes to divesting from fossil fuels. Here, however, it's also important to note that Bill Gates, for example, that founded Microsoft, said in 2019 that fossil fuel divestment probably has not reduced any emissions as such, and that the divestment alone doesn't really drive reduction in fossil fuel burning, because as people divest from fossil fuels, the price of these shares will drop. However, people will just pick them up on a lower price as the share price comes down. So there's no evidence that this will actually reduce the fossil fuel industry's capability of doing business, because people will just take the lower share price that's undervalued and still make a return of that. So you're kind of just transferring ownership from people that are still ready to invest into fossil fuels, which is a significant number. Instead, however, he insists on investing into initiatives that, are breakthrough technologies, like initiatives that will actually, reduce emissions and therefore allow you to make a financial return, as they are breakthrough. They allow companies to meet their climate change commitments and therefore reduce their negative impact on the environment, and you to profit as an investor, because these are very sought after solutions by companies worldwide. Personally, in my ETFs portfolios, I invest into some thematic as well as some exclusionary options to meet my personal values as well as my growth ambitions in terms of my portfolio, what I want to achieve in terms of growth, as well as looking at thematic areas that I believe are going to be very important in the future. In either case, I recommend you to ask a financial advisor when it comes to specifics, as I am personally not a financial advisor. A vision is very important to see where do you want to go with your portfolio. Do you want to be more risky and try to look for more higher growth, higher leverage opportunities, or do I want to go for a safe passive investing portfolio? That's something that you have to make up your mind about, but in this video we'll just discuss ETFs. So in terms of that, it's really important to consider what are your moral values, what do you want to perhaps exclude from your portfolio, what are some thematic areas that you know a lot about, perhaps through work or through your relationships with people or through the news that you read and are confident about. This is something that you have to decide personally, and will allow you to align your money with your moral values and develop a portfolio that will drive that vision for you. Often a financial calculator can help, where you can basically put ETF options that you consider to buy and look at how the growth trajectory has gone over the past years. In this case, it's also very important that you look at a fund that ideally already has been there for more years than less, so that you can see what the rough trajectory has been across time, so that you know what you're getting into and what, the past is not necessarily a prediction of the future. It could be an indicator of where and how the industry is going. All right, now next up we'll discuss avoiding greenwashing. How can you ideally avoid greenwashing, and what even does it mean? Greenwashing is a term for false reporting of sustainability credentials. So basically, how is a fund or a company reporting its positive environmental or social or governance benefit to society, but actually doesn't own up to that promise or that reporting of what it is actually doing? So kind of lying in terms of how sustainable you really are. Now, there's several ways that we as investors can seek to minimize our portfolio decisions of products that actually are lying in terms of the positive environmental or social or governance benefit that they have. In this context, I have several different tips on how you can best go about that. Number one is to identify what is actually the purpose of the fund. Is it positive or negative screening? Are we looking to include certain things, or are we looking to exclude certain things? So, are we, for example, what we said before is we have a thematic fund on a specific industry, or is it an exclusionary fund where we're looking to exclude certain industries that we disagree with? Once we understand this, we want to analyze vague terms or descriptive terms of the fund. Like sometimes they're called SRI or ESG screened. And based on that, we want to Google that fund and see if there's any information on the methodology of how they have gone about owning up to their sustainability credential. For example, if it's an ESG screen fund, they will have excluded certain industries, and that will be included in their methodology sheet. However, when it's impossible to find this information, you've looked a lot and it's impossible to find, that is already a bit of a red flag in terms of the transparency that fund has, and therefore tries to be sustainable. And that it's really difficult for us as an investor to understand what the fund actually includes. So it's really important that we look at, is that information there or is it not? And sometimes when they say yes, they exclude weapons, but then, how do they even define that? It's always good when a fund does make that distinction and tries to explain how it is sustainable. And oftentimes they will say something like, if there's more than 5% of business involvement in conventional weapons industry, that is classified as an unsustainable characteristics of our business, of our fund, and therefore we're excluding that type of business from the fund. That would be pretty transparent, and they would have a list of criteria that we can refer it back to. Another important factor that I always consider as key is to look at the actual holdings of the fund. Have a look at what the actual companies are that are included, not just the top 10, but all of them, to consider if you morally agree with these companies that are listed there. Sometimes you will be really surprised, because even in fossil fuel excluding ETFs, you sometimes have fossil fuel companies because there's some kind of terminology, methodology loophole that you weren't considering when you were buying the fund or considering to buy it. So I would always have a look at the actual holdings of the fund and see if you agree with them, because sometimes there can be surprises in there that, you know, might be written really well in the description. Oh, we are so sustainable, but then we are actually including all these companies that I personally, you know, don't really agree with. So it's really important that you have a look at that and see that you are okay with the companies that are included in there. Another thing to include, to consider, is looking at third-party certifications of individual companies, and there's different platforms that allow you to do that, where you can basically go on the platform, you insert the company that you are trying to look up in terms of their sustainability credentials, and then they'll give you a rundown of what these companies are doing, what they're not doing, and it will allow you to get a more clear understanding of the companies that are involved. Also, if you might be unfamiliar with some of the holdings in there, it'll give you a clearer oversight and help you to align your money with your moral values. So that's really important, and there's different examples. One that is pretty comprehensive is from S&P Global, which will be linked in the description, so feel free to check that out.